and in defense of our brother Judas?
We can't leave anyone behind.
Welcome to a new video on Jewish philosophy. Could it be that everything we've been told about Judas Iscariot is wrong? Could we have misunderstood him? Maybe Judas wasn't a traitor but a victim? We will analyze this. We have two guests, Ariel from the channel Judo Historia and Luis from the channel Magisterium Levi. I'll leave in the description the videos, the channels of these two great figures that you might already know. Let me start with you, Ariel. Judas, what's your view? Was he guilty or a traitor? What's going on with him?
Look, all of this has many layers, right? Because we can analyze it from the literary point of view of the story, which is what the story about everything related to Judas conveys to us. And we can also analyze it through the historical layer. I'd like to maybe get into that a little bit later, but if I may, everyone here knows that none of the three of us are Christians, but we know a little about Christianity. And I've been studying the figure of Christianity for more than 20 years. And therefore, let's suppose for a moment that everything described in the New Testament account occurred exactly as narrated. It happened exactly as it is told. Isn't that what Christians believe? And the story of Judas is a story that has many repercussions later throughout history, especially in the negative association that the Jewish people have had in their relationship with Christianity. Christianity states the following, and that's something I'd like to emphasize. According to Christianity, Judas acts as a traitor, depending on which gospel we're looking at. On his own initiative, whether out of greed or because of envy or temptation by the devil, and it doesn't matter. That is, there is an initiative on the part of Judas within the account of all the gospels, from Mark to John. But at the same time, Christian theology postulates that everything that happened during that week of Christ's Passion had to happen as part of a divine plan, so that humanity, from the Christian point of view, may reach redemption. I believe, and that's my humble opinion, that there's a tension here, there's a paradox here, there's a contradiction here, because both postulates can't be correct. Oh, that Judas is a traitor. Throughout history, anything seen as evil and linked to Judas will also be applied to him. Betrayal, greed, diabolical. Oh, that everything that happened was the result of a divine plan, and therefore Judas in that case is a necessary element in the story. Is there a paradox here? And therefore Judas becomes, from my point of view, perhaps the most dramatic character in the whole story of the Passion. And from the point of view of what I'm telling, maybe even instead of a traitor, a victim, who perhaps should have been an anonymous character, who perhaps should have been a character from that point of view. And now I'm speaking, accepting everything that Christianity claims. I still won't say if Judas was a real person. What then is actually historical about the Passion story? But yes, everything that had to happen, happened because it was part of a divine plan that the Son of Man had to be handed over so that through his death, humanity would be saved. It means that everything that helped that plan to be carried out has to be included within God's plan. And in that case, Judas is not guilty of anything because then he had no choice. And if he had no choice, then why for 2,000 years has he been labeled a traitor? Maybe Judas, from the point of view of this story, is not only a traitor, but the most important person in the story. The character without whom Jesus would never have been handed over, and therefore, if Jesus had never been handed over, he would never have been crucified. If Jesus isn't crucified, humanity can't be saved. And if there is no salvation for humanity, then there is no Christianity either. According to the Christian account, everything involving Judas is necessary, so we can't blame him for anything. And I think now it's clear that we here are not Christians, and we're not in a position either to tell Christians what they should think. But I've been involved for many years with Christians of all denominations. And I think it's time for Christians to start re-examining how they viewed the character of Judas throughout history. And I'll say something else even. If I were a Christian, I'm 100% sure that this reflection, this self-criticism would be mandatory for me to do, especially considering the harm. And we'll probably talk about that later. that everything that was attributed to the character of Judas negatively affected the Jewish people because of the association between the name Judas, Judah, Jews. And therefore, Judas symbolically represents the Jew, the collective Jew who betrays, who is greedy, who is diabolical. And therefore, I think he's a character that needs to be reviewed both historically and theologically. Obviously, I'm not a priest, I'm not a pastor, and I'm absolutely nobody to be saying what I'm saying. It's simply a reflection I'm making about what I would think if I were a Christian, which I'm not, and it's important to clarify that.
I'm shocked. I have a video about Judas and invite you to watch it. Ariel also has one on Judas. And we came to a similar conclusion. Judas, I think, has been seen and judged unfairly throughout history, having a role from the Christian point of view. Again, I agree with you on that he is the one who triggers the spark for all the events that lead to Christianity. In other words, who founded Christianity? I don't know if it's too bold to say that Judas deserves the gratitude that Christians should have. Very strong words. Shall we move on to Luis, or would you like to add something else?
No, I just want to say that, as I sometimes say on my channel, it's 100% clear to me that what I just said is not for the faint of heart. And if anyone felt offended, I'm very sorry, but well, you think what you think, and I also like to have the freedom to express my thoughts about it from time to time.
Judas is also our brother. It's just that many feel an urgency to vindicate him, like every Jew throughout history.
Brother Judas?
Brother Judas, greet Judas.
We won't abandon you.
Well, what I'm saying is this. The events narrated in the New Testament about Judas are not historical, but rather theology. Let's look at this clearly, especially in Matthew's case. We'll see that he intentionally copies what is assumed about Ahithophel's betrayal of David, which appears in 2 Samuel. We'll look at it in detail. And he does it intentionally because he wants to establish a typology, which is the typology of the traitor. Jesus suffers the same thing that David suffered. And we'll see, even with the Greek, that it's a copy and paste. In many parts, only a few words change. If you can put up the paper, Jacob, we can see it. To start, there are two deaths, one in Matthew 27:5 and another in Acts 1:18. We already know the first. He threw the silver into the temple, left, and hanged himself. All right, perfect. The second version is from Acts. This man used his ill-gotten wages to buy a field where he fell headlong, burst open, and his entrails spilled out. Today, I'll only discuss the Gospel of Matthew to keep it brief due to time. But this second part of Acts, the second death, is the same death that Antiochus had, which appears in Flavius Josephus, but that's for another video, because otherwise we'll be here until tomorrow. Maybe we'll do a second part. So we'll talk about that and bring in the Gospel of Judas from Gnosticism, the one I have on screen, by Pagels or other authors, right? To complement what we're going to talk about today, we're also missing the Gnostic part, the one I mentioned to you at the beginning. The first version, the hanging, is not history but theology. The evangelist Matthew didn't invent the hanging of Judas. He intentionally copied it from a story that happened 1,000 years earlier. This is called typology. Matthew is using the literary pattern and language from the passage of 2 Samuel 17:23 from the Septuagint to continue his narrative about Judas. And now put it on the screen, Jacob. In Greek, we have Matthew 27:5 and 2 Samuel 17:23. If you notice, it shows Judas betraying Jesus and Ahithophel betraying David, both going out and hanging themselves. If you see it in Greek, then it says exactly the same thing. It says apelzon, apesato. Well, I'm going to tell you something. This apelsen, apelzon, it's very rare in Greek literature for it to appear identically in both texts. It's a very clear proof of intentional allusion. Because let's see, for example, if we look at the Gospel of Mark, it's different. It uses different words. Here we can clearly see that Mateo wants to use the Septuagint. Now we're going to show that it's this Septuagint. By the way, if someone is watching us, what we're presenting about 2 Samuel is not in the Hebrew text. It's in the Greek Septuagint. That is the Greek Bible. So this is taken from the Septuagint. And we're going to see it clearly right here on the screen. You've probably noticed that they're the same letters, the same words, everything exactly the same. It's a copy and paste. We'll be seeing it. So we clearly see that the writers of the New Testament, including Matthew, understood the life of Jesus. The antitype was not an isolated event, but fulfilled patterns, events, and prophecies. The types from the Old Testament. Second type, from Samuel, Ahithophel betrays King David, God's anointed. Taneamete, the antitype in Matthew. Judas betrays Jesus, the ultimate anointed one. by using the same sentence structure and importantly the same verb for the final fate, as we just saw, a very rare practice in Greek. It's only in the Septuagint, meaning it's not a usage from that time, it's taken from the Septuagint. Mateo establishes an unequivocal connection. The betrayer of Jesus fits the same pattern as the betrayer of King David. And here I bring you some parallels that if someone reads all of Samuel, you'll see that we clearly have a chapter here. David at the arrest and the death of Judas. After his Last Supper, Jesus leaves Jerusalem for the Mount of Olives, called Oros ton Eleon in Greek. We'll see it says the same thing in the Septuagint. And if we turn to 2 Samuel 15:30 on the next page. After Absalom rebels, the king and his household flee Jerusalem and reach the Mount of Olives, Oros ton Elion. That is, similarly, Matthew, Jesus, and his followers leave Jerusalem and arrive at the same place, the Mount of Olives, Oros ton Elion. That is exactly the same as was recognized. And here we have a Catholic quote. Obviously, as Cyril of Jerusalem acknowledged, the setting of Jesus is designed to reflect that of David after Absalom's insurrection. Although there were many ways for David to escape, he chose to flee by way of the Mount of Olives, in thought, so to speak, invoking the Redeemer. Catechesis 2:12. On the way to the Mount of Olives, David meets someone. Who? Ittai the Gittite. Despite the protests, Ittai responded to the king and said that he would support his cause even unto death. 2 Samuel 15:21, Ittai's men joined him. This is picked up by Pedro traveling the same route with his teacher, the same route that David took. He also said he would go with Jesus, even if it meant dying with him. Matthew 26:35. And all the other disciples agreed. But so far we see that they follow the same patterns, they go to the same place, they take the same route, everything is exactly the same, the events are the same, the narratives are the same. Once on the mountain, Jesus alludes to Psalm 43, a Psalm of David. Jesus laments with the words we see there from the Psalm, which is in Greek. It says like this. It says, Ilipos estines sic mu. That's exactly how it's written in the Psalm. David laments using the Psalm quoted in Matthew 26:38 and in the Psalms, expressing his anguish to his disciples. This display of emotion emulates another. David also arrives at the Mount of Olives, just like Jesus, with emotional anguish, crying as he walked. 2 Samuel 15:23-30. Now that David and Jesus are in the same place and condition, the parallels become even clearer. On the Mount of Olives, Jesus falls face down and weeps, like David did. The fatigue of Jesus' followers is repeatedly emphasized, just like the fatigue of David's followers. Jesus, feeling that his hour has come, orders his disciples to get up. Let's go. This inclusion is strange in the context of Matthew because the words he is using in Greek refer to the concept of bracing or resurrecting, and he is using it to connect David and Judas. We can clearly see what he is presenting. These writings from Matthew 26:33 are unusually common in 1 Samuel and 2 Kings. That is to say, the language that Matthew uses is characteristic of the Septuagint. Psalms 42, 43, and Matthew show the earliest usage of this Greek usage. And we will see it later. For example, we see how Josephus uses it, for example, for Psalm 43:5, for David's emotional state. Let's continue so we don't dwell too long on philology or linguistics. In 2 Samuel 16, the disciples actually don't refer to David's story anywhere. An explanation involving David and his followers is also available. Get up, let's run away. So now we continue with Judas's betrayal. We're almost at the end. We're at Judas's betrayal. While Jesus orders his disciples, get up, let's go. A crowd armed with swords and clubs arrives at the Mount of Olives, where Jesus is betrayed by Judas. The place and the act of betrayal gain greater significance when seen alongside Absalom's revolt on the Mount of Olives. David discovers for the first time the betrayal of his closest advisor, Ahithophel. Judas's betrayal of Jesus, like so many other things in Matthew, is taken from the script of the Old Testament, in this case the Septuagint, to the point where Judas's procedure for capturing Jesus follows the model of Ahithophel's counsel for capturing David. After defecting to Absalom, Ahithophel proposed to take a group at night and fall upon David. When tired, he struck only the king, causing everyone with him to flee. This is 2 Samuel 17:1-2 about Ahithophel's advice. Judas leads a large group at night and confronts Jesus while he is distressed and his disciples are exhausted. Only the shepherd is wounded and all the people who are with him flee. Is that the perspective or the narrative? Here begins the kiss of death, the kiss of Judas. Clearly, Judas then kisses Jesus, identifying the one the soldiers should arrest. Some people use Gnosticism to claim Jesus had a twin brother, saying the kiss distinguished him, but that's not our topic here. Let's focus on why the kiss is used. Judas's improper kiss becomes even stranger because of the unusual form we see here, the rare emphatic form that Matthew uses in Greek, because that means the kiss. Kataphileo means to kiss gently and with feeling. It's strange, isn't it? The Jews who say, let there be a kiss, right? Tender with emphasis, right? Isn't that so? Well, since Judas's greeting kiss probably can't be explained by the typical action of a disciple, public stuff from Rabbah is indecent. We have it there. This can be explained with Joab during Sheba's uprising, which David fears may surpass Absalom's recent revolt. David's former general, Joab, is sent to the front where he meets his political rival, Amasa. After extending his brotherly greeting, Joab grabs Amasa by the beard, kisses him tenderly, just like Matthew, and then fatally stabs him. As Matthew Henry said, Joab's kiss and Judas's were very similar. In both cases, the traitor leaves Jerusalem with a large group, falls upon his brother, greets him, grabs him, kisses him, and causes his death. Matthew adds hail to his mark and source on Judas's lips. Echere. Why can this everyday greeting serve as another textual sign for readers? Joab's deadly greeting of betrayal reminds us of what Hugo Grotius notes in his book, or annotations. Evangelio Orun, explaining the passage, has Jesus asked Judas, why do you kiss me? Didn't Joab approach Amasa for the same reason before? We can clearly see that even within Christian patristics, among Christian and Catholic authors, they are also linking the events narrated about David and Jesus. Now we have the companion, the topic of the companion that we are going to resolve today, which many people are going to resolve today. Today Christians will discover there is a prophecy that doesn't appear anywhere in the Old Testament, but Matthew is going to fulfill it here using the Septuagint. That's why I say you won't know it, but now you will. It's about the companion, right? There we see itaer, which means companion in Greek. And it tells us, if Matthew draws Judas's lines and actions from the Old Testament, his Jesus is equally aware of the Davidic role in which he has been chosen. He cleverly responds to Judas's kiss of betrayal by calling him iter, meaning companion or friend. Ahithophel is known everywhere as David's friend in the Psalms. Psalm 41:9, my close friend who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. In Psalms 55:14, it's not enemies confronting me, but you, my equal, companion and close friend. They are often used together to refer to Ahithophel in rabbinic texts, as you will see today. Ariel and Jacob know, but Christians who don't watch likely don't. Avot 6:3 identifies the friend and traitor from Psalm 55 as Ahithophel. The Babylonian Talmud later combines Psalms 41 and 45 to also refer to Ahithophel. David's closest friend and disciple, as shown in Sanhedrin and the Midrash, was Ahithophel. The Midrash on Psalm 55 says David had no greater friend, making Ahithophel's betrayal even more bitter. The Targum on Psalm 55 even goes so far as to insert Ahithophel directly into the text, evasively naming David's friend in the Targum. The conclusion is clear then. In much of Jewish literature regarding Psalms 41 and 55, Ahithophel is the friend whose closeness makes his treachery even more biting. This, by the way, was also pointed out by John Calvin, although he was not aware of these rabbinic texts, but he already interpreted it this way, that this friend was Ahithophel. I mean, I haven't brought it because, we summarize it here. And this last part is something more visual, let's say. So these words you see in Greek on the left are in English. Oh, it's the King James. I clarify this in case any Protestant later says, no, it's the Catholic Queen Mary version or something like that. Well, 2 Samuel in Greek in the Septuagint and Matthew in Greek are also in the Septuagint. All those words you see are the differences because the rest is exactly the same in Greek. The rest is the same. Everything is the same. What you see there is just a difference there. But anyway, go up to the first difference. The first difference is Elzen and the other is Elzon. The second one is exactly the same, which is the Mount of Olives that's put there so people can tell the difference. But the second difference concerns Oros, as the place is the Mount of Olives. Oros Toneleon. That one is exactly the same. The second one matches, but the rest are the only differences. What does this mean? That the text is copy and paste. Some words are also different, like in 2 Samuel 15:21 and Matthew 26:33. One says aperquis, aipen, and es zanaton. while the other uses aposonaien instead of sanaton. That is, one says, I will accompany you until death, and the other says, until I die. In other words, the differences are not very, let's say, excessive either. We can clearly see that this is a copy and paste. So the verbal correspondence we see between Matthew and 2 Samuel, the rare and identical use of a person implies Matthew, or his source, is intentionally alluding to Ahithophel's death when describing Judas's death. We also see this in Origin, that the one who rose up against David was Ahithophel, just as the one who rose up against the Savior was Judas the traitor. Specifically, Judas implemented Ahithophel's cunning plan to betray, just as Judas does to Jesus. And with this, we finish. But before we end, Jacob and Ariel, who also know, didn't anyone find it strange what we've talked about today? In the genealogy of Matthew, when it says there are 14 generations between Jesus and David, it's the number of David in Hebrew letters, it's 14. Gematria, or gematria as we all know. So that relationship that exists in the Gospel of Matthew between Jesus and David continues. It is maintained throughout the Gospel of Matthew, not just here.
Well, actually, whoever wants to watch my video, I also have a similar line when it comes to comparing with other types of prophecies. In my opinion, it's also a compilation. And in fact, the figure of Judas is so iconic that it's Judas Iscariot. That's also a question in itself, which would be worth addressing in another video. Because if he's Iscariot, I mean, a person who comes from Kerioth, or is it because of the word Sicario? Was it because he was a redhead? Many unknowns remain. How did he actually die? You mentioned 2 accounts, but there's another where he swelled up. So, what is the real truth about his death? Christian tradition presents us with 3. Apparently, he is, as we said, a symbolic figure. It's no coincidence his name is Judas Yehuda, since he clearly represents the story's villains, not the Romans, but another scapegoat with a name like Judas. In any case, thank you both for participating. You already know about the comments. I'll leave you the link so you can go to Ariel's and Luis's channels and leave your comment. What do you think? Maybe it's time to vindicate Judas. In my opinion, yes, and I think Christians should too, from the perspective that was presented. The Gospels themselves actually mention that. It wasn't even Judas's fault. They gave him bread. The devil entered. He wasn't himself. He was possessed. We should blame the devil, not Judas. So I think there's a way to redeem him. Well, that's it for now. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Jacob, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be on this channel.
My pleasure. I'm delighted. It's perfect. Bring us back to the channel more often. I don't know what you have to do.
Levy doesn't invite us very often. That's true. We don't come around here very often.
We should visit more, Jacob, so you'll have more videos to upload.
Yeah, well, the last time we got together, social media blew up with the one about just writing. I also shared them on the pages. At least, I don't know, 40 people, like pretty big YouTubers on social media reacted to that. So I don't know if this is the next earthquake, but you're welcome to take clips from the video, analyze them. The content is all yours, all right? Greetings.